Most recently, East Asian countries such as Japan, Korea, Singapore, and China have demonstrated that this recipe can work. It was possible to prosper by building deep manufacturing capabilities and by exporting increasingly complex manufactures. But the share of manufacturing has been declining initially in the advanced countries and now virtually everywhere. Academic publications have begun making references to premature deindustrialization. But the numbers suggest that the future of development is more closely tied to services. And GDP growth would need to be sourced from improvements in productivity, with services playing a leading role. It is because digitization is accelerating the shift away from industry and agriculture towards services that the outcome of the transformation has taken on such significance. The tech visionaries, and we heard one recently, believe that the digital era is in its infancy. They are convinced that it's only a matter of time before the new technology comes into full flower. And we can look ahead to many years of rapid growth. After all, it took a few decades for electricity to make its mark on industrial productivity and innovation. Already, striking advances have been made in machine learning, especially in the areas of perception and cognition. Firms that have harnessed the potential of AI platforms have used their algorithmic virtuosity and network effects to scale businesses, enlarge the scope of their activities, and acquire competitive advantage across disparate industries. A McKinsey report estimated that Arab countries could add 4% to their GDP by fully exploiting digital technologies. Digitization could boost Europe's annual productivity growth by close to 1 percentage point each year. And by developing AI, it could potentially add $2.7 trillion to its GDP by 2030. Another report in 2019 claimed that digitization could add 13 million to global GDP, again by 2030. Clearly, digital technologies show considerable promise. Few of us would want to wind the clock back to a time when we did not have smartphones or an abundance of apps or Uber or Airbnb. The COVID pandemic brought home the advantages of online shopping, conducting business through the internet, working from home, and staying connected either by Zoom or by WhatsApp. In short, digital technologies have conferred numerous advantages, some of which GDP does not capture, what economists call consumer surplus. The optimists might also be right that measurable gains in productivity are just around the corner. All that it takes is for companies to make the needed organizational changes, to invest in a suite of skills that complements digitization, acquire and master the software, accumulate usable intellectual property, build a brand image, and harvest customer and market information. In other words, enhance the organization's performance by accumulating intangibles. Intangible capital can unlock the potential of digital technology. Physical investment is still needed, but in the new technological environment that we are entering into, it is assumed to play second fiddle to intangibles. According to a slew of academic papers, many leading firms are doing just that. The share of investment in intangibles has risen by almost 30% in American and British firms, and they're already putting more money into intangibles than they are into tangible capital. It is claimed that firms that accumulate intangibles grow faster because intangibles are more scalable, give rise to more spillovers, and generate greater synergies. And these firms, which comprise some of the top 20 to 30% in advanced economies, are amongst the most productive and profitable than firms that have been slow to invest in intangibles. So as we leave the COVID pandemic years behind, can we look forward to decades of sustainable growth fueled by productivity, with ample employment opportunities for the workforce? We could, but the evidence suggests that thus far digitization is not moving key economic indicators, and the medium-term outlook is cloudy, which brings me to my second point. Digitization has been ongoing for 3 to 4 decades now, but after an initial spurt in growth starting in the mid-1990s and extending into the 2000s, GDP growth has slowed. Most importantly, productivity has declined in virtually all countries where the new technologies have made deep sectoral inroads. This includes the United States, Germany, Japan, Korea, and China. And there is no upturn in sight. Past technological epochs, after a lag, generated numerous new occupations, job opportunities, and ladders for offering income mobility. Attempts to forecast the likely impact of digitization point towards a substantial winnowing of jobs in all sectors. Between 1/4 and 1/2 of all jobs are at risk or at high risk in the United States, in Europe, and in East Asia over the next 2 decades, and from automation and AI-enabled technologies. Worldwide, job losses could run into tens of millions. Undoubtedly, continuing digitization will also create new jobs in data analysis, machine learning, process automation, cybersecurity, software development to service green infrastructures, and others still to be defined, many requiring specialized tertiary level technical skills and soft skills. But labor absorption into digital occupations and associated gains in productivity could be slowed by labor supply bottlenecks, as the needed skills are very scarce. Many workers lack even basic literacy and numeracy skills and cannot use online tools. There are several risks that come with digitalization. Let me just mention 4. First, rapid technological change should make it harder for displaced workers to find jobs, especially older, less skilled, less mobile workers with high school education or less, who are by far the vast majority, 68% in the United States, are in this category. An increase in structural unemployment would be economically burdensome, and it would deepen political and social fissures. We see signs of such fissures in many countries. Second, skill-biased digital technologies can also widen income disparities. Already the so-called great divergence in incomes is a troubling development in several advanced economies and in Arab countries as well. The share of income accruing to the top 10% and to the top 1% has been rising and could be exacerbated by the pandemic. There is concern that the middle class is being hollowed out and its growth is being weakened. A third risk is the increase in market power of a few large firms that utilize digital platforms to dominate key industries. This is a development that can stifle competition, new entry, and innovation, and by concentrating wealth and political power can be very difficult to reverse. A fourth concern is the increasing vulnerability of digitized and networked economies and societies to cyber attacks, to the weaponization of key networks, to severe weather events, and misinformation. A smart city could be brought to its knees if key infrastructures were damaged or disabled, as has happened in East Asian countries recently.
Dr.
Essential
Shah,
services.
Can we do the suggestions after? Now after you align the risks, can we talk about the suggestions for the region after?
Sure, I can stop here. If you'd like me to stop, right?
Yeah, if you don't mind, so that we can move on now. We've been in for 12 minutes.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Doctor. Jan Sturesen, founder of Resting Advice from the Future. Can we get your comments on Dr. Shahed's presentation so far as well, and your own presentation?
Thank you very much, and I think it's a very interesting comments we've heard about how digitalization is helping us to move in to a new era. But this is, of course, we have to make risk analysis, and I would like in our conversation coming here to discuss those risks, what happens when we think about maybe this kind of intangible as only digital. That will be my comment, highly inspirational. I will now say that I think future has arrived. The unnormal is the new normal. This means knowledge navigation for all of us. To interpret weak signals, we capture them digitally or by our imagination or vision and dreams, whatever it is. I think that's a new thing, and what we need today is great visions for the future. So we know where to navigate, where are we going, and how do we know that we have arrived. You can say that this intangible economy and the intangible generally has a great impact in society. And it's very easy to think about the digital assets as a digital thing, as a bulk of big data. That's, of course, sure, that's what it could be. But let me say that intangible is more. The idea of this conference, Dubai Knowledge Summit, starting up 2017, that idea has a higher price than the whole conference, including today. We have running with 4 or 5 different conferences. What I'm trying to say is ideas are intangibles. Ideas for the future are the most valuable thing we have. We should think about like a graveyard, probably the most valuable place, because there are all the visions and dreams being buried. But we should think about, as we heard here today, about the future to take us into this situation, to understand how do we then apply wisdom into knowledge. And knowledge today is, as we heard also in our presentation yesterday, as soon as it gets digital and it gets into the internet and so on, and databases, it gets for free. So knowledge is free, very low cost. But wisdom has a high price. How do we anticipate? How do we understand? How do we get this into our own mind and heart and brain and our own being? That's the question. And let me say that when there's a lot of new demands, when new business models comes, the demand of intangibles are great. So if you have a product, or if you have a service, or if you serve with a function, taking care of a function or an issue, or you're a platform provider, or you are an orchestrator of an ecosystem, or you have a big data analytics, you can go in a chain here, in a staircase. It's of course very different. But all these steps needs intangibles. And I think there are intangibles like intellectual capital. And one of my favorite professors in intellectual capital, Professor Leif Edvinsson, has been pioneering a lot about what is really the intellectual capital. And I think there are at least 3 very, very important dimensions, and that is the intelligence capital in a society. Number 2, it's about the structural capital in the organizations. And number 3, it's about the individual knowledge capital in each and every one of us. The thing in common for these 3 dimensions is that they are completely have a huge need for relationships. So intangibles needs relationships with you and I, with people around, in organizations, in nations, in society, to share those ideas. So probably we need new processes for how do we collaborate, how do we innovate, and how do we get the right skills in place for the future we are heading to. Let me also say that besides intellectual capital, we have intellectual assets. Of course, could be digital assets in the balance sheet. Question is, how do we value this? And it could also be intellectual property. So we have a lot of different types of intangibles we need to deal with in this process. So if we think about that the future holds an operating system with data in the midst, maybe AI on the left, and Internet of Things on the right, and blockchain on the top, we need to figure out how can we look upon this model with AI in reality. AI, here today, right now, means for me, and I give you a new definition, AI means authentic intelligence. We need authentic intelligence because that's the basis for intangibles. That's the basis for intellectual capital, for all kinds of intellectual assets and intellectual properties. But we need to connect that, of course, with artificial intelligence, which means how do we be ahead of the process? How do we not be the slaves but the masters about what is to be decided, what is to be executed, and how do we put these things in place? This takes us, I think, to the need for a deeper discussion on values. So future of values comes together with future of technology, and then we would say, okay, how does the ethical matrix look like? We can do, we can't do. We won't do, we won't do. So if we can do and would like to do, let's do it. But if we can do it and should do it, yes, let's do it. But if we can do it but we feel we shouldn't do it, don't do it. Mm-hmm. This is how knowledge be transferred into wisdom. And we have to go from, I think, data, information, knowledge, understanding, wisdom, and here comes the final play. Collective wisdom. In an open society being discussed, what's the best, maybe not the best practice, but what's the best option? What's the best option for you, your company, your family, your city, your nation, to figure out how do we take a new step? What should we do? What shouldn't we do? So I think in this matrix, there are a lot of things to be discussed. And let me end with saying, I think there is a risk that if we allow the digital processes to take over everything, we will put ourselves into a kind of process where we have a digital self-destruction, which is not good. So if we have everything in the cloud, we will have a problem, especially if we will get in the future a cyber pandemic. Then it's not so smart to only have it in the cloud. At least not a cloud which is an open bar. Everybody can monitor and control and check it out, and they know everything about everybody. So a very clear suggestion, how do we scale this up with intangibles, is of course, how do we make a complete firewall between cloud providers? First one. Second, with those external encryption firms who allow us to have encrypted data, completely taken away from those who owns the cloud. And number three, the client or the data owners who have put the data in the cloud. So I think this is right now a huge discussion in every nation in what happens now, and the cyber attacks big time coming, which is connected as well to war situations, of course, but also the things about Internet of Things and others. So we need to figure out, our smart cities do not become a digital prison, but allowing the collective wisdom, using, because I love technology. We should use it, we should apply it, we should have it together with our understanding. So AI as artificial intelligence and authentic intelligence, we put it into a process and we find a way to look into, so we can say, well, if we have a crisis, maybe we still have some coins and money so we can pay, so we do not only go digital by cloud, but we do by cloud, we do digital, but we do manual. This is about being ready-made for the future. So with these words, I say thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the conversation and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we should get a legal perspective now on the matter. So, Dr. Calhoun, Rep, please pattern attorney, intellectual firm, and publisher of the Knowledge Economy website. Please.
First, thank you to the UNDP and the Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Knowledge Foundation for inviting me to participate in this Knowledge Summit 2022. I came to the 2018 summit as an observer. The theme was youth in the knowledge economy, and it certainly attracted me. And I'm thrilled to be back here, and both events are tremendous. I'm Calhoun Reb Thomas. Reb is a nickname. I've had it all my life, so if you want to talk afterwards, please call me Reb. Calhoun. Anyway, I've been a practicing attorney for more than 35 years, and I oftentimes tell people there are two types of attorneys. There are the trial lawyers who are very smooth because they have to be as calm, persuasive as necessary to convince a jury. And then there are the other ones who are a little bit less smooth, like myself, perhaps. We call ourselves typically transactional lawyers who do business deals and sometimes work in intellectual property with things like I do. Most of my career has been large software and services transactions, trademarks, patents, and startups. I've recently been scaling back the practice of law to be able to scale up my interest in the knowledge economy and the innovation economy, because you can help one client in a certain amount of time across a conference room table. You can reach a lot more people through the internet, and that's ultimately where we're looking to go. You can find me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/knowledge economy, not surprisingly. And we've got our theme here, protecting humanity and the planet in the pandemic. And some things that happened to me yesterday, I was going to go partially in this direction anyway, but I'm even more motivated by it now because of testing that had to be done. I was unaware that to be able to get back in my own country, I had to have a test. But yesterday, fortunately, we have a testing group out in the lobby, so it made it incredibly easy. And within a few hours, I had an email that said I was negative on COVID, as I knew it was. But the interesting part was there was this big, bold, all caps reference to molecular biology. And I call it to your attention because the idea, we've gone through a lot in the last 2 years, but the idea that people could create a pop-up little facility and in just hours, they can be telling us whether we have an infection for a virus or not, suggests we really have come a long way in trying to deal with this kind of technology. I typically call it bio-nanotechnology, because a virus is so small. They talk about it being invisible, but it's incredibly small, smaller than light waves, for example. And we have to be able to deal with this kind of problem because DNA, RNA, protein, all down at the scale, and we have to get better at it, and we are getting better at it. I believe we're making great progress, but we can always do more, and we will. I want to mention, because you build up knowledge over a particular period of time, one of the women researchers who's gotten a lot of press lately is Catalin Kariko, and I've probably butchered her name, my apologies, but she is the kind of researcher you love. She worked in obscurity for more than 2 decades, working on trying to figure out the ins and outs of messenger RNA, or mRNA as people describe it. And it's because of people like her that we have the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines that are protecting so many millions and millions of people around the world, because she spent those decades in obscurity when nobody even thought her research was at all interesting or would ever lead to anything. But she did it, and it came to fruition at the right time. We talk about artificial intelligence in many of these presentations. A lot of how we're going to get better at dealing with biological processes that occur down at the nanoscale is going to be dramatically improved through the use of artificial intelligence. You may have heard that protein folding can be a very challenging process for researchers and academics to figure out. Through the use of artificial intelligence in the last couple of years, last 1 or 2 years, they've made tremendous jumps forward. And it's incredibly impressive how that's moving. Because we're talking about growing our knowledge here, I'm going to give you 2 books just quickly. Nano Comes to Life by an Oxford researcher by the name of Sonia Contera was in 2019, and Bio-Nanotechnology by a Cambridge researcher, Liliana Fruck, in 2021 are both interesting books that I commend if you have any interest in this bio-nano area. And having bionano.com, you can find a reference to an article about Catalin Kariko is recently posted there. All right, this panel is about growing the knowledge economy in an age of intangibles. I'm going to get fast here. What is the knowledge economy? It's the direction that government leaders have been trying to take us in for decades. In 2000, UK Prime Minister Tony Blair said, "I strongly believe that the knowledge economy is our best route for success and prosperity." More recently, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, Vice President and Prime Minister of the UAE, has repeatedly asserted the preservation of leadership, excellence, and sustainable growth and prosperity requires us to embrace the age of the knowledge economy as soon as possible. The partnership between the UNDP and the Knowledge Foundation has produced tremendous activities, from the Knowledge Project, sometimes I guess called Knowledge for All Project, this annual Knowledge Summit, the Global Knowledge Index, the tremendous book. I encourage everybody to get this Future of Knowledge report. Looking through it hurriedly, I'm just really impressed by, sorry, time for me to shut up here apparently. Really impressed. One last definition, briefly. What is the knowledge economy? This is a quote from the World Bank Knowledge for Development Program. The application of knowledge is now recognized to be one of the key sources of growth in the global economy. The term knowledge economy has been coined to reflect this increased importance of knowledge. A knowledge economy is one where organizations and people acquire, create, disseminate, and use knowledge more effectively for greater economic and social development. I'll tell you an easier way to think of it. A person's name by the name Eric stands for education, research, innovation, and commercialization. Those are the steps that basically have to happen in order to kind of develop any success in a knowledge economy. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rep. Thank you. Moving forward, I hope we can keep this more of a conversation. So please, whenever any of you would like to step in and give a comment, I would start with Dr. Shahid. You spoke a lot about digitizing the economy, but I really, there's something that I felt we could focus on. We were talking about an age of intangibles and more intellectual people. These are assets that do not have physical or financial embodiment. How do we get there? I mean, we spoke a lot about having them. They are part of the economy, but how do we get there? How do I become an intangible asset? How do I become something that is important for the economy, for the knowledge economy, for the future of a country? When we say that, we talk about our children.
Okay. So, as you said, there's a lot of emphasis being given to the accumulation of intangibles by companies. And it's really in the control of the companies how they accumulate this intangible capital. Much of it is embodied in human beings. So the extent to which they can train people, they can create an organizational structure which is conducive to the most sort of efficient provision of services, to the extent that they can do research and development in order to accumulate knowledge. All of this is part of the building up of intangibles. Likewise, building up brand image, getting sort of market information, all of these things add up. This is within the control of companies. Some of the best companies are very active in doing so, in trying to accumulate these intangibles, and they lead to a great deal of success.
You can feel the effect, yeah.
But if you look at it in terms of the macroeconomic picture, if you look at it in the macroeconomic picture, the fact that the economies as a whole are investing less in physical capital and trying to transfer more of their investment into these so-called intangibles is certainly helping a few superstar firms. But it is not really affecting the economy as a whole. Most of the smaller companies, which are the vast majority, do not invest in intangibles. They do not try and do research and development. They do very little training of their workers.
So will they become obsolete?
No, they're not. Well, let's put it this way. They are a major drag on the economy. And the fact that a few large superstar firms are actually doing a lot of work is not compensating for the fact that the vast majority are not. And therefore, macroeconomically, as I said, you are not seeing an increase in growth rates. You are not seeing an improvement in productivity. In fact, you are seeing exactly the reverse. So this God is failing us. This intangible God thus far is failing us.
So Jan, how do we get there? How do we build on that?
I think we need to design common processes in both nations and cities and regions about how do we really collaborate. And that means real projects about how do we, for example, how do we make contingency planning about intellectual assets and intangibles? For example, how do we really crack the nut about giving third-party encryption providers? We can protect the intangibles. We can protect the databases. We can protect the clouds. It's very hands-on things. Find the real ways, the real projects with have incomes, and also design process so you connect collaboration with innovation. And then you take the case, that could be the cloud, could be human robots, could be surveillance system in the city. There are so many different things you need to practically speak about and say, let's prototype, let's innovate, let's test, and let's find out how we learn.
And while we're doing that, how do we protect ourselves legally, Reb?
How we do what?
While we're doing all that, all these trials, how do we protect ourselves from a legal perspective?
Well, I think we have a great legal attorneys and guys around. But,
is it something that we can actually move forward with and be able to protect our community, our society, and also put it in the correct legal framework, going into a major digital transformation for all economies?
Well, if you want me to take this,
Yes, please.
I am happy to. Not every country is the same, obviously. Every country has its own set of laws and regulations dealing with intellectual property. They're becoming more uniform, perhaps, but you have to deal with the laws and the regs you've got, and sometimes it's critical that you get the protection. Other times, some people come in looking to try and obtain registrations for trademarks or maybe patents for inventions that they love. You know the old expression that says,
But if you
your baby is never an ugly baby.
If you put too many laws and regulations, will you kind of stop innovation? Will you stop people from being creative?
Say that again, if you stop people?
If you put a lot of legalities and laws and specific frameworks, will you stop people from moving forward and becoming more creative in order to get into this?
Governments are struggling with that right now. The United States is certainly struggling with it, and other countries, the EU struggles with it with data issues and the like. It's a challenge to figure out exactly what the right balance is, and I think governments inherently are going to make mistakes. But we all work within the system, and we try and get there's push and pull from both directions. And, some people think there should be no intellectual property laws or protections at all for anything. Everything should be open.
Available for
Other people
everyone.
are very proprietary and going to hang on to everything they can grab. Somewhere there's a happy medium, I think.
Dr. Shahid had a comment.
Yeah, on this issue of regulations and standard setting by governments, I work on green technologies, and it is very clear that some of these regulations which the government imposes, requirements that, various companies meet certain, emission standards. They're very important for innovation. Without them, there wouldn't be this kind of innovation taking place. So while regulation can stifle under certain circumstances, in other areas, I think it's very important that the governments take this kind of initiative. If I might just add a point about, we talk a lot about AI, but we're really talking about deep machine learning, deep learning. And the question we have to ask ourselves is it really taking us anywhere? Because it lacks common sense. And we often don't understand what's happening in the black box now. So we are having to actually try and reverse engineer to see what it is that we are trying to develop.
Mm-hmm. If we look at it from a different perspective, we're saying what it is. My question is, where do we find opportunities in this? Given that different countries have different infrastructures to be able to adopt and adapt these new intellectual aspirations and all the intangible assets that we see around us. So this question is to all three of you, if you may. Where do we find the opportunities within the current infrastructure of the world? Who would like to go first, Doctor?
Well, let's say that there is a sort of a hierarchy of countries.
Okay.
And you will have, certain countries, Japan, China, Korea, the Nordic countries and others, which are in a position and have the human capital horsepower to be able to harness these technologies effectively and have a broadly educated population which is computer literate enough to be able to utilize them, and the companies then can build up the intangible capital they need. Mm-hmm. But the vast majority of countries are not in any position to do so. So to force this technology on those countries, I think, is highly dysfunctional because it is labor displacing, it's highly skill biased, and it's not going to affect their economic performance.
Yeah.
I think it's a necessity to have good governance. And I think we need also policy prototyping, governance prototyping in nations, including international collaborations, which means how do we deal with data protection? How do we deal with AI regulations, which is, if you quote Elon Musk, it's a lawless area. It needs to be in place. Everything is regulated, but not really what matters today when we talk about AI. So how do we find a way here? And I think the cybersecurity issue is now helping us to understand we are moving probably away from what I would say geopolitics into, I would say, geotechnology, which means what technologies will be in place when we use these for the future. And these are now melting together, and we can see, for example, the kind of a intellectual war or fight between US, who can come to Europe and grab the data and go back, and the prosecutor will sue the Swedish companies or other European companies. We need to find a way of how do we work together, which we agree on. So kind of a standardization on one hand, and international law, but also I would say the legal industry needs to be innovators, to redefine new things linked to intellectual capital, intellectual asset, intellectual property, and do, what is a patent? Patent of what? A thing, a human being, a robot,
a thought,
an idea, a function. So I think creativity applies for this new industry.
So we cannot control creativity, or we should not control, or we need to control it?
No, we should be creative, but we need boundaries, of course.
Okay.
And we should think also that lawyers are creative human beings.
Okay.
There's no question that
I'm not so sure.
lawyers could benefit from a dose of being more inventive and creative. AI, we're talking about AI here. AI is such a challenge. It's long been the law that if you make something, you have the right to treat it as a trade secret, even if you don't want to obtain a patent on it or protect it under copyright laws or whatever. You can say, I've made this, but I'm not going to show you how I've made it. It's considered a trade secret. That's protectable almost in every country's situation. AI is kind of like that. If you're a computer scientist and you're developing part of a team building an AI project, you don't necessarily want all of your research, all of your efforts, all of your invention, creativity that you put into your AI project to be regulated perhaps into open source, because we get into these challenges of people have to have financial incentives in some fashion or another to be able to do stuff, as opposed to letting the others who could sit around and say, well, I'll just wait until I can get my hands on it and not have to spend all that money on R&D and the creative aspects of this thing. And AI is a really challenging product because it is oftentimes referred to as a black box. It's incredibly statistically based, and there's a lot of creativity in doing it. We are still, as a world, trying to wrap our head around what it's like to have very deep machine learning or artificial intelligence built into computers.
But we're getting there, no? We're heading in that direction.
We're making progress. There's no question about that.
I think I have to open the floor for questions if anyone has a question. But very, very quickly, something, please, yes, let's get the mic there. But also, I would like us to have to comment on the cyber pandemic, because we are now in a pandemic, and that's not fun, but that's a viral pandemic. So talking about cyber pandemic scares me, and I would like your comments on that, but after we hear the question. You don't want to give us the question? No? Okay. How about you? You tell us the question, and and I'll just say it back.
So, first of all, thank you very much for the distinguished panelists. Outstanding insights. My name is Walid Hussein from the Saudi Arabian oil company, Saudi Aramco. So, two brief questions, and I want to bring this conversation closer to home in the Middle East. First of all, translation of research, inventions, and innovation into impact has always been a challenge. Commercialization. Dr. Thomas, you mentioned one of the enablers for a knowledge-based economy or transition to knowledge-based economy is commercialization. Now, academic institutions in this part of the world, they produce patents and IPs and what have you, and they go to the shelves regrettably. You don't see an effective translation of these patents into small startups or to scale up or technologies that can be licensed. And there is no impact eventually. So it's research in the sake of research rather than research for the sake of impact. So what can be done? Just recently, Silicon Valley was a great Silicon Valley report we just recently published. It says that Silicon Valley now is housing 260 unicorn, the highest ever in the history of Silicon Valley in the US. Great gap between us and the rest of the world. The other questions for Dr. Youssef is how we would consider digital transformation not as an end by itself rather than enabler for business transformation and a cultural transformation. Many organizations, they look into deploying digital technologies as an end by itself rather than a mean to change the business, transform the business and scale. How can we bridge this cultural gap, if you will, when we initiate digital transformation initiatives and schemes? Thank you very much, and my apologies for
Thank you.
for getting some time.
Thank you. So initially, research for the sake of impact. Who would like to take that one first?
Well, his first question, I think, was towards me, and I understand that in research labs, both in academia and in industry, you're always going to have some things that are misses. You're not going to be successful on every research project. Everything's not going to result in a wonderful product and an actual piece of intellectual property like a patent or other things. But that said, we can do more. We can get better at this. And it sometimes just takes communication. I don't want to say the United States is absolutely always the leader, but we do some things right. And the rest of the world learns. And we learn from certain things that other countries do. And the more we communicate that, that's part of what's behind my efforts to try and build a community centered on the knowledge economy and or the innovation economy. And we get more people in more countries communicating. I think we can get more utilization and more best practice adoption.
Dr. Shahid.
Yeah, just on this question of R&D, for many countries, investing in R&D is seen as a necessity, something that they need to do in order to juice up their GDP growth and so forth and their productivity. But what I have found from my research on Korea, Japan, Taiwan, China, etc., is that a lot of this money is being sort of frittered away and wasted. It goes into rents for academics and researchers. It actually generates numerous papers and patents, but those patents and papers don't convert into commercialized processes that actually have an effect on the bottom line. So for instance, Korea invests 4.4% of its GDP in R&D. But if you look at Korea's growth rate over the last 15 years, steady decline in growth rates, steady decline in productivity. So I am at a loss, and China is doing the same. Japan invests over 4% in GDP in R&D. What should you advise countries? Countries that are saying, look, we need to increase our spending on R&D because those X is doing that and Y is doing that. But most of that money goes into a bottomless black hole.
So what do you do?
So you have to do some in order to be able to absorb and assimilate technologies from somewhere else. You do need to do, let's say, 1% of GDP of research in order to be able to just do that. But basic research and cutting-edge research, you have to wait till you have acquired the wherewithal, the human capital, the knowledge capital to be able to do that. Don't do it prematurely. Don't push the frontier when you are nowhere near the frontier.
Can we take another question, or do we have to wrap?
He had a second question, but I didn't get it.
He was talking about moving forward towards digitization, right?
كيف مع الناس yes okay في طبعا تايمر صح yes great
Oh boy, I didn't.
That's the question, is how we should consider digital transformation as enabler rather than a goal by itself.
Oh, okay. I guess digital transformation has become a buzzword. So, countries feel that if somehow they can pursue this vague and rather ephemeral objective, that this will galvanize the economic situation. But it has to be sort of unpacked into what it actually means. And it actually means things like building up human capital, particularly knowledge capital, broadly speaking, and it also means developing firms, startup companies, existing companies that can actually translate the technology which is there and the human capital which they can access into actual outcomes. And what I've said earlier was there's an enormous problem in the quality of the workforce that most countries have, including the United States, including all OECD countries. If you look at the PIAAC findings, they are very, very disturbing. The quality is poor. So you have the aspiration which is up here, the capabilities which are down here. Until the gap is closed, you're not going to get anywhere very fast.
Well, we'll fix
So-
it. We'll start doing it better.
So Jan has a comment, but Aramco is investing as a company in the youth and in startups, and you are getting places there. So maybe companies investing is better than governments investing. Just putting that out there, please.
I think there is the definition also between what is automation when it digital is a part of business, or when it's digitalized, which means digital is the business. It works when we are not there. But my point here is maybe we need to have a new measurements, new, I would say, we talk about KPIs, key performance indicators, but maybe the time has come for key IIs, key impact indicators.
Okay.
And that takes us to the...
KPI is a very difficult word. People hate it now. So.
Key IIs, key impact indicators. But my point here is, how do we come into a sustainable digital situation? And I think we talk about open source, open data, open code, or would it be even, as Ursula von der Leyen, the chairman of the European Commission, said, we maybe need open algorithms. And what's next? So how can we then say, well, US, it's business. The big techies decide, even the former president, if he could make a tweet. And that's, of course, ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then you go on to China, and government controls everything. And they know every surveillance systems, face recognition, and they know all about it, So how can we, Middle East, Europe, and Africa, maybe with young populations, how can we create digital freedom with personal integrity, with a view of the future. We say, this is the way to make it. Make it open, make it secure, but we need to work together in a robust process, allowing us to have the reality as a friend, not an enemy. And one of the enemies today is definitely the cyber attacks.
Okay. And the cyber pandemic.
Exactly.
I mean, that is, again, do we have another question? Or, okay, we have other questions. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm sorry because my question.
I will ask in Arabic. My question is, first, thank you very much indeed for Knowledge Summit organizers. This is really valuable. How can we invest in human capital and structural capital and individual capital during the digitalization? We are talking about creating values and ethics. What we can do and what we can't do and don't do. How can we do that? What is the criteria or the scale that we can use to calibrate and measure what we can do and what we can't? Thank you very much indeed.
Capital, the organizational capital, and in the age of digitization. That's the first question. The second question someone was talking about the values and how do we decide what values, I think if I'm getting that right, what values, what to do and what not to do moving forward in the future when it comes to digital transformation. So these are the two questions. You can choose.
I'll throw in one thought, which is when you say, how can you invest in it? Every country has to kind of make their own decisions about how much they're going to generate in terms of revenue through taxation.
How do you know the return on investment when you're investing? Because Dr. Shahad was speaking about countries are investing in R&D, but then the results are not that great. So how do you invest in Intellect?
I go back to there is no promise that just because you do R&D that it'll actually turn into something good. It takes hard work, it takes experimentation, it takes smart people, it takes education. We have got to prioritize education. Every country on the planet has got to do a much better job of prioritizing education. Because if you don't start with education, you don't get, great R&D or great commercialization from the R&D. You got to start with the education. And the most highly educated countries are doing well. I mean, you mentioned Korea, and they have a tremendous investment in R&D. Economists sometimes say, we don't see the productivity growth there. And Shahid and I were talking about it on the walk over here. It's a challenge to fully measure productivity. And there are a lot of economists, brilliant people like Shahid, struggling with the best and most appropriate way to truly measure whether we are or are not getting these productivity gains. Mm-hmm. But as long as we keep doing better at education, everything else will come out.
We'll get better. What about the ethics and values, what to do and what not to do when it comes to digitization? That was the question.
Well, I think it's important we need to agree on something. For example, what is a human being and what is a machine? Which means it's easy to tell a machine talking to you, asking to get human rights, to say, no, you cannot get human rights because you're not human, period. That's and we have these topics all over the place right now. So I think the common values discussion is a key thing. And I would also say that every nation needs a skills plan to understand what are the future skills needed for the future jobs, future industry, future ecosystems. And I would say that's not least vocational training, which also will be digital in a way, but it's new skills, and we need to invest in this. And I hope and I dream to see skills funds to be invested in to get people, high and low, rich and poor, the opportunity to be invested in, to be more skillful, because what worst things can happen is, one of the reports taken forward by the European Commission 2 years ago, both Mr. Lauren Probst, who spoke in that other room about Future of Skills report, Future of Knowledge report and myself, one of the conclusions in the report was Europe, the European citizens are over-educated but under-skilled.
Okay.
That's a very bad combination. How do we get right education and we get the right skills to solve the problems or ask the questions, as was said?
Yeah, so not over-skilled and under-educated, that's also a bad combination.
Absolutely, but
Yeah.
we need to find the right balance.
Right balance.
Education and skills, and then we need to say what are the issues we're dealing with? Food, security, and so on.
Yeah. Doctor?
Yeah, just on the question of how to improve the quality of human capital. That's what really matters. And I've looked at two countries in particular, Finland and Singapore, both of which are nearly at the top of the tree in terms of quality of human capital. What seems to stick out is, one, the quality of the first preschool education, and we talked about that earlier yesterday. Secondly, the quality of teachers, how much status they have, how much time they have to prepare. This really matters. And third, in the quality of the school principals, how well trained they are, how they disseminate the best knowledge about schools to other principals. So these three things seem to matter a great deal to the outcomes in terms of quality of students.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shahid Youssef, Jan Strutsen, Dr. Calhoun Thomas, Reb. Thank you, esteemed guests, for being with us today. I would have wanted to have a few more minutes just to get a quick wrap-up, but I think we ran out of time, and Amira's staring at me. So thank you for attending Growing the Knowledge Economy in an Age of Intangibles. Thank you all.
Okay.